In the middle of the forest, under the shadows of the trees, I had wandered through the darkness until the way was lost to me. But it was there I heard a calling, and it was there I found belief. It was then that I found courage in the hour of my need. And I walk on foot with a faith and trust to guide me through the darkest dark wood. In the valley of the shadows, there is nothing I shall fear. 'Cause if that dark should overwhelm me, I know the light would soon appear. Through the mystery of questions and the wilderness of days, I have wandered into blessing and then stumbled upon grace. And I walk on foot with a faith and trust to guide me through the darkest wood, dark wood, I walk on foot with a faith and trust to guide me through the darkest wood, through the darkest wood, dark wood. In the middle of the forest, under the shadows of the trees, I had wandered through the darkness until the way was lost to me. But it was there I heard a calling, and it was there I found belief. And it was then that I found courage in the hour of my need. And I walk on foot with a faith and trust to guide me through the darkest wood, dark wood.
It's another tune of ours from our album. We're going to do this one for everyone out there today. It's very nice to be here in St. Catharines. It's our first time here, and Hope to see you back many more times. It's a number of ours we're going to do called Working Man.
Call me the working man. Yeah. All right. Rush. Working man. From an early, rare recording from a Catholic high school in the 70s. That's Rush, Working Man. Boy, did they have no clue what lay ahead of them. Wow. Hey, why are we beginning the Converging Paths podcast with Rush today? Well, because this episode, in most respects, is all about the working man and the working woman and anybody really who's working. We're going to be into some ancient insights through this obscure letter to a little church in a place called Thyatira in modern day, what is now modern day Turkey. That if you know the code language behind this letter in the book of Revelation, you know something about the history, you realize that he's not talking about end time stuff. He's talking about his day and the struggles in this letter of working folks and a source of hope for working folks. So, hey, it's going to be a really, really interesting episode tonight. But hey, before we begin, let's get into roll our own show opening.
Converging Paths. Converging Paths.
All right. Music by the incomparable Jeff McAllister, not Rush, but still pretty doggone good. Welcome to our podcast today. We are not broadcasting to a live audience today because I will be actually out of town the day that this goes live. But today we continue our series on the 7 letters to 7 churches of the book of Revelation. And during this series, if you've been paying attention, you know that we're using the book of Revelation, these 7 letters to 7 churches, to really explore some ancient struggles with some people who were really part of Christianity 1.0. I mean, those early days, those heady days where the memory of Jesus was still quite fresh, and certainly people really felt they were in touch with a power much higher than themselves that filled them with love and grace. It was really heady times. But we also find that these letters, even though they're not written about like this end times that people think, that are coming true in our day and pointing out who's the beast and who's this and that, even though John was writing to people in his day, what we're finding is these struggles, and we're going to find this tonight with the struggles of working folk, they're perennial. You could really find both the terror and the wisdom contained in the book of Revelation at any point in history, not just simply in John's day or in ours. And really, as a subtext to this whole series, maybe a little more than subtext, I have been building a case that if we pay attention to the letters, these particular letters, again, understanding the code language that John is writing in, he's writing about the fall of Rome, but he can't say that because he's in prison for being a Christian, and he's got to get these letters out and pass the Roman guards, and he wants to keep his head attached to his shoulder, so he's writing in all this code language. But if you know the code, you know the history, the wisdom it contains really is helping us, I think, is tremendously helpful to us today as we make a transition now from Christianity 2.0 to Christianity 3.0. And I've dealt with kind of what 2.0 has been Christianity, the empire. It really started back in Constantine's day in the 4th century and has really started about 150 years ago, has been starting to metamorphose, like that caterpillar has just started to kind of build its cocoon, and now we're in the deep goo phase where the cocoon has been built and the internal structures of this faith have really melted down, and they're kind of stinky and wondering what on earth is this, and is it over? Is this the end of Christian faith, and so forth? But just as in that cocoon, in a caterpillar's cocoon, there are imaginal cells that contain the DNA of the creature that it is going to be, metamorphizing there. So right now, there are definitely imaginal cells all over, and not just in Christianity, but this show we're focusing on Christianity in particular. There are imaginal cells within this worldwide faith that are kind of in the goo, and just like in the caterpillar's sense, the old structure, the cells of the old structure don't recognize that the new cells. They seem foreign, so they're under attack. And so life is pretty hard. And yet, just as it was in the early church when Christianity was just emerging, but once those imaginal cells kind of clump together and find each other, and they start to form new patterns, which then start to really bring out this new creature that is being called into, and it's being called forth into the world. And same thing is happening, and we're hoping this podcast is a small part of that. The imaginal cells finding each other, linking up, and starting to resemble this new creature. And this is going to be a really fascinating episode tonight. If you really take the insights from this letter seriously, I think it would revolutionize work as we know it, and would also revolutionize Christian ministry as we know it. And I really do think that it's pointing, the insights would actually help us emerge into this amazing creature that can fly. So, but before we go on, I want to acknowledge that Converging Path Podcast is sponsored by the Eden Tree Foundation, that employs present and emerging technologies for spiritual exploration and growth, while fostering interfaith understanding, empathy, and community. We're also sponsored by Darkwood Brew at darkwoodbrew.org, which contains the world's largest collection of small group resources that are specifically geared to the Christian pluralist community. That is, those who embrace fully the path of Jesus without denying the legitimacy of other paths that God may create for humanity. And finally, this particular series is sponsored by Paso Grille Beach Community Church on beautiful St. Pete Beach, Florida. An open and affirming United Church of Christ congregation that holds worship outside on its beautiful patio on top of a labyrinth at 8:30 in the morning, and then inside at 10. They are going through this series concurrently with us. Well, tonight, the Church of Thyatira. I want to just preface this by saying, when I went to seminary in Princeton Seminary, just down the road, there was this town, it was actually the capital of New Jersey, named Trenton. And if you cross the Delaware River from Pennsylvania into Trenton, New Jersey, on the bridge was emblazoned in neon lights Trenton's motto, which was, "Trenton makes, the world takes." Trenton makes, the world takes. And boy, did the world take from Trenton. It became, throughout much of the 19th and much of the 20th century, Trenton was a major manufacturing hub for the area. Lots of things produced there, goods produced there. And yet, starting in the 1970s, when the winds of globalization started to waft through our country, well, let's just say the world continued to take from Trenton, but it was no longer the goods and services that it was producing. It was the jobs. They were being exported overseas. And so Trenton kind of imploded in a sense, at least economically and in many ways in his own sense of being. And I was there in the mid-90s. I have no idea what Trenton's like now. It's probably, experienced some revival, I'm guessing now. But back in the 90s, it was a pretty sad place to be. I tried to avoid going to Trenton very much because it was just full of a lot of decaying buildings and was very down on its luck economically. The world had taken and taken from Trenton, and it showed. Well, our church in Thyatira, to which John is writing, this is our fourth letter now, it was very much a working class town as well. And just as Trenton is about 50 miles from the ocean in New Jersey, Thyatira is about 50 miles from the Aegean Sea. So it also kind of shares this kind of inland perspective. And in contrast to the cities that we've been to that were really rather large cities and also well fortified, Thyatira was kind of out in the boondocks a bit, and it was on totally flat ground. It wasn't like Pergamon that was on that 1,100 foot mountaintop last week. And that meant trouble in ancient days. You could never become a great city if you were on the flat ground, or if you didn't have fortifications or heavy fortifications, because there were these marauding hordes and invading all the time. And Thyatira had neither. They were on flat ground, and they had no particular extensive fortifications at all. And so consequently, anybody with any will to it took Thyatira over if they were invading the area. And in fact, the Roman government itself, once the Romans took charge of this whole area, they basically, the only value of Thyatira to them was as a distant early warning signal. They only had like 20,000 people in that town, in their day. And so an invader would come, they'd take over Thyatira, so the residents would flee to Pergamum or to Smyrna or to Sardis or whatever, one of these fortified villages. That would give the battalions that were stationed there the alert signal to go and fight back. So Thyatira was just it was really it was a heavily industrial town, but it was also one that just kind of got pummeled. And in contrast to these other cities that have been we've been studying so far, that have been very loyal to Rome, very patriotic to Rome in John's day, Thyatira, they weren't patriotic at all. They could care less about the Romans because, what had they ever done to them besides use them as a distant early warning signal? So, for instance, Christians were, in these other towns were in big trouble if they didn't offer sacrifice to the emperor on a yearly basis. This was not of concern to the Thyatirans. So, in contrast to these other cities where you could at least lose your job if you didn't have your proof of making the sacrifice, if you were undocumented, so to speak, here you could retain your job just fine. They could care less. And in fact, Christians in Thyatira would have been part of the working class, like the entire town, and working hard. Thyatira actually had more trade guilds associated with it than any other town we know of in the ancient world. So it was really strongly, heavily manufacturing town. There were guilds to leather workers, wool workers, weavers, bakers, tailors, dyers, candle makers, cobblers, potters, bronzesmiths, blacksmiths, slave merchants, dyers of purple cloth, and stonecutters, among others that they found evidence of. So lots and lots of industry in Thyatira. And if you're a Christian, like say, you didn't lose your job, you were part of these businesses, and specifically the trade guilds, which is going to factor into our discussion quite a bit this evening. But there is one famous resident of Thyatira, and that's a person who appears in the Bible in the book of Acts. Her name is Lydia. Lydia is living in Philippi in ancient Greece, but according to the book of Acts, she was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. You remember when I just read that list of trade guilds, dyers of purple cloth is one of those, literally one of those trade guilds in Thyatira. So she comes from there. She obviously comes from this manufacturing background and has moved and is probably importing then this purple cloth from the people in her trade guild, or maybe even her own family. So that's one famous resident. And by the way, Lydia is also the very first confirmed European-born convert to Christianity in the Bible. Just kind of interesting trivia. But if you go to Thyatira today, you'll find evidence that they were really not much from yesterday. There are no great ruins. There are no fantastic temples or libraries or government buildings or statuaries or anything. There you get just some very minor ruins that really, quite frankly, aren't that interesting to look at. And it's still kind of an industrial-based kind of town today. But really, there was not a lot of wealth there, not a lot of interest from the Romans there, not much interest in being Roman there. And the city god of Thyatira was this god named Tyrimnos. And Tyrimnos was just this minor deity. Now, he was a son of Zeus, but a very, very minor one. You hardly ever hear anything about Tyrimnos. All you know is he rode on the back of a horse and wielded a battle axe. That's Tyrimnos. But he was son of Zeus, and that will come a factor too. He was a son of the major god of the day. So let's get into this letter. I'm going to read the letter to you and maybe throw in some kind of in real time, translate some of the code language that we see there. Here we go. From Revelation 2, verses 18 through 29. To the angel of the church in Thyatira write, and bear in mind, this is John writing words that he feels is being channeled from the spirit of the living Christ while he's in jail there. These are the words of the Son of God. Now, this is the only time in Revelation that title Son of God is mentioned, probably because the city god of Thyatira was this Tyrimnos, who was thought to be a son of the god Zeus. And so this is like, I'm going to trump that. This is the true Son of God, whose eyes are like blazing fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. Now, what's with that language? Well, remember these trade guilds. Actually, bronze making was one of those trades in Thyatira. You find evidence of this trade guild stuff all over this letter. That's one of them. Burnished bronze was actually one of the specialties in Thyatira. That's in ancient times before they developed the glass technology. You burnished bronze to create mirrors. Anyway, so there's reference to this, kind of the bronze works that melt, the blazing fires that melt the bronze, and the burnished bronze of his feet. It's like, basically, there's a subtle hint here that's going to be less subtle as we get into this. I am the master, the lord of the trade guilds here, like the bronze workers. I know your deeds, your love and faith, your service and perseverance, and that you are now doing more than you did at first. Now, interesting, he talks about their perseverance and the struggles there, because again, they weren't struggling from not doing the sacrifices. There was another source of their struggles, but not from the Romans. Not from the Romans. Nevertheless, I have this against you, he says. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, this is code language, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality and eating of food sacrificed to idols. I've given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely, unless they repent of her ways. I will strike her children dead. Then all the churches will know that I am he who searches the hearts and minds, and I will repay to each of you according to your deeds. Gives the shivers. There's a lot more that's going on underneath the surface here. We'll get to it. Now I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, to you who do not hold to her teaching and have not learned Satan's so-called deep secrets, I will not impose any other burden on you except to hold to what you have until I come. And in a sense, most of the people at the Church of Thyatira, they basically get the great as most improved, right? And say, hey, just hang on. You've done better works recently than you have. You just hang on to what you have. You're doing great. Hang on, okay? And then he concludes, to the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations, that one will rule them with an iron scepter and dash them into pieces like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. Again, there are guilds, there are potters' guilds, there are ironworker guilds. These are still, these guilds are very much in the background of this letter. I will also give that one the morning star. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Okay, a lot to unpack there. We've unpacked a little bit of it, but who is this Jezebel figure? And what is she up to? What's the problem here? Well, again, Jezebel is just simply code language. I mean, Jezebel is a biblical figure who worshipped a different god, and God's trouble in the Hebrew Scriptures. This Jezebel is most likely she is a representative of a philosophy. She's teaching a philosophy that is actually going to help these Christians, at least on the surface. You remember I said that there's a lot of trade guilds, and in their day, every trade guild, they worshipped a different deity, usually a more minor deity, but there was a god or goddess who was believed to be over the trade guilds. And if you followed the particular way of life of that god or goddess and the rules and regulations, and they had secret rituals and this and that, then the god or goddess would bless your trade. And if you didn't, then you wouldn't. And so if you were a bronze worker, for instance, you might have had worshipped Zeus as your major deity, but you also very much paid attention to whatever god was the god or goddess of the bronze workers, and that god had or goddess had certain understandings of what you needed to do to please that god or goddess. And so if you're a Christian, you said you didn't get fired for being a Christian there. You were also then in the guild and expected very fully to be following the practices of this that were dictated by this god or goddess, because if you didn't, that could lead to that deity not blessing your guild, not fruitifying your labors and so forth. So there was a lot of incentive if you're a Christian that you better follow these rules and the rituals and so forth of this deity of my guild, because it's expected of me, and there'll be trouble if I don't. So again, I mentioned that in the letter, Christ has the burnished feet, saying, "Hey, you don't need to worry about this other. You don't need to choose between these gods or follow this god. I'm enough for you. I'm enough. The blessings will come. You follow me. You don't have to worry about some of these things that they're asking you to do that would be against my values, different form, sexual magic and things like this. You don't need to worry about that." But in a sense, they did need to worry about it because there were their colleagues who very fully expected them to be following these things. And if they didn't, they thought, well, you're taking away from our economic stability because this God will now be angry. So Christians were under intense pressure, but not from the Roman government, but from their co-workers. And this is where Jezebel, or whoever this person is who's teaching this new philosophy, she comes in handy. He says, you don't need to choose between following Jesus and following, whoever is the god or goddess of your guild. You can, you do your work week, you follow the god or goddess who's dictating the work of this guild, and when you come together and worship, you worship Jesus, and you can keep those two realms separate. One governs your vocation, and the other governs everything that's outside your vocation. Yeah. Well, of course, they're worshiping, the Christians are worshiping a God revealed in Jesus who wants all of us, not just part of us, not just the part of us that's left over after work. And of course, if you work in ancient times, you're working long hours and likely 6, even 7 days a week. Let's say you took a Sabbath, you were able to take a Sabbath, you work 6 days a week, 8 to 10, 12 hours a day. So what? Christ gets the leftovers after you have a hard day of work, and maybe gets Sundays. That didn't go so well. We see this happening in our own world today, don't we? I mean, we don't have gods or goddesses that are over our trade guilds, but when you go to work, are you expected to take the values of Jesus into your work? That's really not considered polite conversation to say, what would Jesus think about exporting this, or paying our workers less, or having this corporate merger take place, or decimating this rainforest to produce our products? I mean, that you start mentioning the values of Jesus in the workplace, and now that he does not rule here. The stockholders are what's ruled. So really, the modern day equivalent is the stockholder. Businesses are legally bound to serve the interests of the stockholders. They are the equivalent of the ancient gods and goddesses of these trade guilds. And if you do something that is contrary to the interests of these stockholders, by law, you can be prosecuted, and you can be fined, and you could be put out of business even. So this is a really tight parallel, actually, to our day. If you are Christian and you go to work, you're expected to follow the strictures of the higher power, the stockholder or the owner of the business, if there's no stockholders. And you're expected to put your Christian values off to the side of things. And yeah, you get Sundays and weekends maybe, and post-work, do all you want with Jesus. But when you're at work, yeah. So this is what Jesus had a problem with, and he's rather angry about it. But this isn't just about like an authority thing, like, hey, I have more authority, this person, this God or goddess is challenging my authority. There's actual, like, real life-bearing things going on that are missed if you don't use, if you're a Christian and you're following Jesus, if you don't follow him into your work. I mean, this whole thing about loving your neighbor as yourself. I mean, that's supposed to apply not just on Sunday mornings, but actually throughout your work week. So to take the interests of those to whom you are selling products, for instance, is just as important as yourself. Well, businesses, no, you're supposed to take your interest first, and the seller, you're trying to reap whatever benefit you can from the buyers of your goods, right? But if you're Christian, you're actually expected to take their interests as importantly as yourself, your customers. You serve your customers as just like yourself. And this can cause some problems. Or how about all of what we're doing to create a massive carbon footprint? Do you think Jesus really approves of this? And especially when the most vulnerable people in the world are the ones who are right now taking the brunt of climate change and is starting to catch up with the more industrialized world. Do you really think Jesus really approves of this massive overconsumption of the world's resources? And yet business is governed by different powers and principalities than Jesus. And I think that the letter of Thyatira really kind of throws this down on us. This before, it's just like, we are actually supposed to make the businesses we do life-bearing. We're supposed to actually act out our Christian values, not like insist that like the employees worship Jesus, but if you call yourself a Christian, you're supposed to take those values into your workplace. Again, not to proclaim a faith in Jesus, but to actually do the actions of Jesus, to treat the recipients of your labors as if they are Jesus. That's your customers, your fellow employees, your employer, all those things. Which raises an interesting question in my mind. If we go back to this ancient letter, there's this mention in the book of Acts of Lydia, who is from Thyatira, and she would have been part of the guild of purple dyers, and before she became a Christian would have likely been worshiping the deity that was over that trade guild. So she converts to Christianity. So what happens then? Let me just read you a little bit about her from the book of Acts. It's Luke is writing that on the Sabbath day, we, that is Paul and Luke and a couple others, went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God. Interesting that it says that, a worshiper of God. She's not a Christian yet internally she is connected in some way to God. A worshiper of God was listening to this. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. This is in Philippi. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. And actually, the church then that was founded in Philippi met in Lydia's house. And interesting, it's Lydia's house. It's not her husband's house. She is clearly in charge here, and she's likely quite wealthy. Purple cloth was sold to the wealthy and very, very much a valued commodity, and she's a dealer in it. So she had a house big enough to hold a house church, and she was the one in charge. But I say she was the one in charge, but really, as a dyer purple cloth, she would have been, the deity of her guild would have been in charge. So what happens when she converts? Well, in her world, in order to prosper in your business, to do it properly, you served the God of your guild. But she converts to Christianity, and apparently now she's devoting her profession, her vocation, to a new God, the God of Jesus. And so now she actually is challenged to bring the values of Jesus into her very work. Now, what would that look like if you're no longer serving this God whose rules are exclusively oriented towards that particular guild and and making wealthy the people who are working in the guild, but really no concern really of the customers or the wider world, what you're doing to the planet or anything. Like, you're just focused on the God. Now you're worshiping a God who's actually concerned for everyone, every part of the transaction, every part of the manufacturing. This God loves beyond their wildest imagination. You're supposed to treat your neighbor as yourself. What would that look like? What would the change in Lydia be in her work, not just simply her heart? Well, I have an idea. I grew up on this little island next to Seattle called Mercer Island, and when I was growing up, there was an automotive shop on Mercer Island called Simba's Automotive. Now, they've since moved to Redmond, Washington, but it was owned by two brothers, and they were really popular. I mean, if you brought your car to Simba's, like, you wanted to bring your car to Simba's. You wanted to go there because you also wanted your car to be sick. Because if you brought your car to Simba's, they not only treated your car with such respect and dignity, but you yourself, that it just was this amazing experience. A few years ago, I actually went back and read Yelp reviews from when they are where they are in Redmond now, and people are practically crying when they write these reviews. They're all 5 stars. Like, I brought my car in for this, ailment, but they fixed it, but they also fixed something else for free. And I asked them why. They said, "Hey, it just needed to be done." That's such the Simba's thing. Back when I was a kid, and even to this day, they really take their work seriously. They're completely honest. They do what they say they'll do. They treat you right. It's just like completely several orders of magnitude different from where you're going to get treated in other places. Well, way back in the day, a friend of mine who was really taken up by this Simba's treatment asked one of the brothers, "What is it that makes you so different from everybody else?" And the man responded, "Well, my brother and I are both Muslim, so we treat every automobile as if Muhammad himself is going to drive off in it." Ooh. As if Muhammad himself is going to drive off in it. That's how we treat our automobiles. I don't know about you, but to this day, I have not heard a better statement of what ministry is. It's not about who wears the robes and the stoles. It's not even about who's Christian, who's not. It's like, who is finding what they love to do and then devoting those energies to serving them as if they're the founders of their own religion. Serving them as if they're Muhammad himself, or Jesus himself, or Moses himself, the Buddha himself. Wow. Imagine if Christians understood that ministry is supposed to be like that. I mean, then you'd have ordained ministers who, like me, we preach on Sundays and so forth, but you'd really be into that whole priesthood of all believers things. It's not just the ordained people who are the ministers in a church. It's anyone who has found something they love to do, or whether they love it or not, they're treating the recipients of their labors with the same respect and dignity that they give to Jesus himself. That is what vocation is supposed to be about. And it comes right out of this letter from the Church of Thyatira. You don't serve two masters. If you're an automotive shop, you don't serve just simply the interests of automakers or whatever, auto repairers. You need to be serving, everyone. And what would that do if we really took that seriously? When I was in Omaha, Nebraska, I served a large congregation, and I announced one day that my goal was that within 5 years we would have at least 200 ministers at Countryside Community Church. And now I left there before I had the chance to actually work this out, but we were actually working on this. We were actually working on a new form of ministry inspired by Lydia. Like, Lydia was our inspiration, that when she converted, she then was dedicating her whole vocation to serving Jesus, and was probably like these two Muslim gentlemen from Simba's Automotive, like really taking seriously her customers and also those who manufactured this purple material. And everything from start to finish was about loving your neighbor as yourself and serving the world, not just simply letting the world serve you. So what would that look like? I mean, if you are what if we, and so what I was really setting up was a way of, we were actually going to use dark wood brew materials and that are Darkwood Brew has a 12 series based on the Phoenix affirmations, so 12 6-part series. And we were going to collect people who I'd found something they'd love to do and put them into cohort groups and study each one of the 12 Phoenix affirmations and reflect on the implications of those Christian affirmations with respect to their vocations. So you could, if you did that and reflected theologically on, how do you treat the recipients of your labors as if they're Jesus himself, and you were an auto mechanic, we would then commission you as a minister of auto mechanics. Now, and actually in the United Church of Christ, that your ordination as a commissioned minister would actually be recognized officially. You wouldn't be ordained to quote unquote word and sacraments like I am. You would be ordained to your vocation. But imagine if you really how your vocation, if you're an auto mechanic, could go very deeply. Like if you really you're serving Jesus through what you're doing. You are, first of all, you're doing the Simbas thing. You're treating cars as if Jesus himself is going to drive away. So you're going to be impeccably honest. You're going to make sure you're doing your best work and not phoning it in. If Jesus is picking up the car, you'd think, well, imagine the difference. But also, you might start thinking about the cars themselves and maybe and how they're made, who they're made by, what they're, would Jesus approve of how cars are manufactured today? Like, are we paying fair wages? Are the workers working in safe conditions? You might wonder about the carbon footprint of vehicles, and would Jesus care about the carbon footprint of vehicles? You might not be paid to work on emission standards by your auto shop, but you might just be working on that, right? Just like we might volunteer for a soup kitchen or what have you as Christians from our church. Maybe if you're a minister of auto mechanics, you're actually campaigning for tighter emission standards or working for electrification or whatever it is. The point is, you're thinking about what would Jesus think about every step of this process, and then you're maybe finding ways to then work out the values of Jesus in greater and greater ways. So you can take this in other professions as well. Think about if you are a nurse and you are now treating the recipients of your labors as if they're Jesus himself. Now, I've run into a lot of nurses who basically do this, whether they're Muslim, Christian, Jewish, or even the atheists. A lot of these nurses have very big hearts, and so they are very kind, and people feel very uplifted from contact with nurses. My wife is a nurse, so I'm kind of prejudiced too, or biased. But maybe you're also, if you're treating the recipients of your labors as if they're Jesus himself, it's taking you also to a deeper level in your vocation. You might start thinking about, if it's Jesus who you're treating, you're not thinking that this person before me is defined by their illness. Jesus would be defined by his identity. So maybe it's incentivizing you to pay more closer attention to the human values of your patients, realizing that they're not just simply walking illnesses coming in. They are people with hopes and dreams and struggles and so forth, and identities and glories to them, and treating them that way. But you might also ask, what does Jesus think of the healthcare system that this person is being treated through? And so this might involve you into making certain reforms, either in the doctor's office or the hospital you work for, or maybe you are working for universal healthcare or whatever you think would really serve the values of Jesus in your profession. This is now you're seeing your profession now 360, and you're really seeing, okay, I'm a minister, this is my vocation. I'm not preaching Jesus, but I'm trying to live Jesus and serve Jesus through this. You can take this to very secular fields, like what if you were a minister of financial planning? Maybe then, instead of just simply seeing your clients as ways that they're going to bring in their wealth to you and you're going to be able to gain your own wealth through their gains, you're also going to be asking your clients, what are your life goals that you're trying to achieve through making this money? What's important to you? And so money is, and you're really teaching them that money is just a tool, not an end in itself. And now I know financial planners who do that already too, and they may or may not think that their vocation is connected to their faith. So a good one will do that anyway. But maybe you're also taking this now to a deeper level. If you're serving Jesus and the person sitting across from you should be treated with the respect of Jesus, you might ask, what would Jesus want to make money in? And would there be some things that might upset him if you're making money through this, and some things that aren't? So you're going to actually maybe be looking at the investment portfolios themselves and saying, okay, these ones make certain return financially, but also are there aspects that are of concern in the portfolio that I'm suggesting here? You might actually ask, would Jesus be happy with the way money is being made in this system? So you might be just simply working on more economic justice and helping capitalism become kinder, or maybe you've become convinced that we need another system entirely. Whatever it is, you're the expert. You know more about how finances work than I do as an ordained minister that knows this Bible. Like, you're the expert there, so you're thinking through how would this whole financial system, could it be molded better to serve the values of loving your neighbor as yourself more, and that we're all loved beyond our wildest imagination. I can envision churches having ministers of rock and roll, people who love to play music, and now they're saying, okay, now what if my audience is Jesus? Like, what are the values? They're not necessarily singing, praise music, Christian praise music. They're just simply treating their audiences with that respect through whatever mode of music that they normally make. How would that change things about how that rock and roll musician interacts with their audience, or you sees ticket prices, or whatever it is? Maybe they're fighting Ticketmaster now, like, hey, this is wrong. They're charging all these fees that, if this is Jesus, this is not right. You can turn this in all kinds of ways, but bottom line is, if we really took these values that come right out of this ancient first century letter into the 21st century, it would revolutionize the way how work is done amongst Christians who take this seriously. Like, again, we're not having to preach Jesus in our workplace. We just simply treat those around us with the same respect and dignity, and would change the nature of in the Christian church of who we consider to be ministers. No longer, now under this model where you do have 200 people who've kind of reflected on this, and now you got 200 ministers in your congregation. Now, if I'm wanting to preach on the healthcare system, wouldn't it be great to be able to draw on the skills and interests and expertise of somebody in the medical field who's thought about this for more than 5 minutes, and more than 500 minutes, more than 500 hours, and might have some really good insights about how we could actually change the healthcare system in our time. Give that person a voice, or those people voices. They're not all going to agree, even if they're trying to work out the values of Jesus, right? But let's listen to those people. Let's put the people, those are on the front lines of healthcare. Those are the front lines of social justice in our day. And this would change the whole nature of, when you're a Christian, you go to church, you think, well, I'm going to volunteer a couple hours in the soup kitchen on Saturday, and that will fulfill my mission for the week. Well, no, your mission can be that, but it's also, like, if you're a working person, your mission is what you're doing with 8 hours a day in your work. That's your primary mission field. And again, you don't have to preach Jesus. You don't have to mention his name once. It's just, how do you carry those values into your workplace to influence what's being done there? That's your primary mission. And you are the experts that the churches should be listening to when we're asking about, whole industries and so forth. So ministers like me then, people think, oh, the ministers are supposed to be on the front lines of social justice. No, the congregation is, and us ministers are more like the seminaries. Our task is to help people understand what is in these scriptures and this faith tradition, their theology, and and then be in conversation with how do we apply this in these different settings. Revolutionizes everything, from soup to nuts. And Jesus has this promise that he makes if we will do that, if we will make him Lord not only of Sundays, but of Mondays and Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, and Saturdays. To the one who is victorious and does my will to the end, I will give authority over the nations. That one will rule them with an iron scepter and will dash them to pieces like pottery. Now, I have a problem with John's words sometimes. I don't approve of all this language here, but I interpret it, though, to mean that, if you're a working person and you've kind of had the thumb of the man on you, take these values seriously, really take this spirit into your workplace and be bold, work to make changes, and you may run into trouble, but you also ultimately will benefit, and you'll benefit others through this. You will smash to pieces systems of injustice, just as I've been given authority from my Father. The letter continues, I will also give that one the morning star. Morning star, that's code also. Morning star in Scripture is what appears after that long night. Like, yeah, you're working hard, and boy, there's a lot in our world today in businesses and different, wherever we're making money, there are a lot of issues to work through, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be controversial. But you will, if we all stay at it, where those imaginal cells, we start clumping together, we will prevail eventually. This could take, it's on God's time, not ours, right? But just know that after this long night, there is a hope. The star, the morning star does come out. You're going to put in your labors. You're going to think it's all darkness. It's should I give up? But keep at it. And you eventually, that star, you will see it rising. And that star will be the sign that butterfly is coming out. That butterfly will emerge. And perhaps we can live in a world where we don't have to choose between our faith and climate change. We don't have to choose between our faith and underpaying workers and exploiting people. We don't have to choose between our faith and money as our God. That actually that we are doing truly on earth as it is in heaven. Hey, it's been good to be with you. I'm glad you joined us tonight. And let me leave you with a blessing. I'm going to accompany this blessing with my singing bowls here, as I did last week, I believe. When you take a deep breath in, let it out slowly. And maybe just simply take a moment before I offer the blessing, if you want to stay on, just to let this sink in a bit. And think about your own vocation, or if you're retired, like where you spend your time. If Jesus is the Lord of that, and specifically his command to spread love, to love your neighbor as yourself and work it out that way, what new and beautiful thing can you do for people and for yourself and for your Lord through making the Christ the Lord of all our time, not just some of it? And may the Spirit of the living God made known to us as Christians most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into places you may not necessarily go yourself, go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong and constant companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone on this journey, and you are loved beyond your wildest imagination. Friends, may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you and through you now and always. Amen. Thanks for joining us. See you again next week.